Good evening and welcome to the Hanover Public Schools Parent Outreach Series. Our guest this evening is Jim McCauley, and Jim will be speaking to us on coping with uncertainty for parents. Jim is a licensed social worker, co-founder and associate director of the Riverside Trauma Center. Jim provides mental health supports for schools, workplaces, and communities affected by traumatic events. He has consulted with numerous schools and communities in Massachusetts and New England on trauma responses, and he has presented at statewide, national, and international conferences on these topics. He has extensive experience providing therapy to children, adolescents, and adults, and has managed outpatient mental health clinics for more than 20 years. Jim is a graduate of Boston University School of Social Work and a senior lecturer in the sociology department at Suffolk University for more than 30 years. An Army veteran, he has a special interest in developing and providing services for our returning vets. It is my great pleasure to welcome to Hanover this evening, Jim McCauley.
Well, thank you for that nice introduction. I appreciate it, and I'm really happy to be here and be able to join your community for the next 45 minutes. I want to just tell you a little bit. Jane was talking about the Riverside Trauma Center, and just to tell you who we are and what we do. We're a program of a fairly large nonprofit mental health agency, Riverside Community Care, which serves a lot of the towns up and down 128, particularly, and the trauma center is funded by the Department of Public Health and the Department of Mental Health to provide what's called critical incident response, which is just a fancy way of saying when something bad happens in a school, workplace, or community, we go in and provide mental health support. So more often than not, that's after a sudden unexpected death. But it's also for large-scale disasters like hurricanes. We responded after the Boston Marathon bombings, and of course now we've been responding and trying to support towns and schools throughout the state in the midst of this COVID-19 epidemic. And I think I don't have to tell you what kind of an impact this has had. This experience, these last 9 weeks have had on people. It's been incredibly difficult and stressful for people, and just some recent studies that really support that. So if you're struggling yourself or your family members are struggling, just know that you are in good company. A lot of people are describing that. A recent study showed that almost 45% of people are reporting that they're having a negative impact, that this COVID-19 experience is having a negative impact on their mental health. And about almost 20% say that it's had a major impact on their mental health. So certainly true for all age groups, for all populations. Definitely it's more of an issue. I think people who were struggling in any shape or form before are having an even harder time. Certainly that's something that we've been seeing be the case. And you know, it's I don't know if people have been talking about this pandemic as being a trauma experience, but it really is, and it's sort of both trauma and grief, which I'm gonna talk a little bit about. And what happens is when we're talking about trauma and grief, people usually talk about the emotional reactions that they have, their feelings about it. People sort of talk about the anger that they have, or the guilt, or the sadness, or the irritability, and certainly those are prominent, but they're actually not the most prominent reactions that people have. And we see reactions in a number of different domains. Certainly social behavioral changes that we see, both in kids and adults. I mean, people tend to isolate more, they tend to withdraw, people are more short-fused, and those are all common reactions that we see to this abnormal event. The primary reactions that we see for see in people are really in their body. People have so many more physical complaints, certainly fatigue, maybe a stomach ache, or feeling more hypervigilant and finding yourself having more of a startle response. People have difficulty with sleep. These are all common physical reactions that people are having, um, and um, and I think sort of one of the ones that I think is so important for parents to understand and for school professionals to understand is the impact that trauma has on our cognitive functioning. And so when your kids tell you that they can't concentrate, they can't concentrate. This is neurobiological. They may be confused and having intrusive thoughts, but the concentration and remembering, these are all extremely common reactions that people have when they're overwhelmingly stressed. And I don't know if we'll get a chance to talk about it tonight in such a short amount of time, but there's sort of another domain that I want to make reference to, and that's the whole sort of spiritual or meaning making domain. And for people that have strong religious beliefs, they might find that they're questioning their religious beliefs, or just the opposite, feels like their beliefs are actually strengthening them and supporting them. And so we just see that huge range of reactions. But a lot of times what we see would almost look like what we talk about as being people being burnt out. People sort of questioning the work that they're in and their life, their current lifestyle and what they're doing, and just sort of maybe feeling like they're not as good at what they're doing as they used to, and just that whole range of just sort of existential reactions that we see are really incredibly profound. So I think the take-home point here for these 5 domains is just, we want you to just notice your reactions. We don't want you to make judgments about them. And that's not just because we want you to be kind to yourself, but it really is neurobiological. We want to be able to just notice those reactions. And then when we do that, then we can get it from the back of the brain up to the front of the brain, where we can do some good problem solving with it. So the message really is sort of notice your reactions and don't make any judgments about it. Something else, I mentioned the word grief, and some of you, and I certainly offer my condolences, may have lost family members during this time. We've seen so many people lose a loved one during these last couple of months, and the pain has just only been exacerbated by this sort of interrupted grief, by not being able to follow all of the rituals that we find so helpful when we're in the middle of supporting each other during our grief, and not having people around us, and not being able to sort of have a gathering at the cemetery, or not being able to have a wake. These are all just absolutely huge losses that complicate our grief reactions for us. So just to acknowledge that, I think is really important. But we're also seeing something else that we are sort of, just for lack of a better term, we're referring to as ambiguous grief. And that really is sort of, we always associate grief with the death of a loved one, but other losses really can result in a pretty strong grief reaction. So people that have lost a job, or have lost their house, or fear of losing their house, or that loss of safety that's so important to us. We talk about something called shattered assumptions. Generally, most of us think that we live in a fairly safe community, a fairly safe environment, and that we have some control over our life. And these kind of experiences that are happening now really sort of shatter those assumptions and make us feel like we're not safe at all, and that we don't have that much control over our life. So it can really feel also like a huge loss for us. Loss of social connections. Social connections is such an important protective factor. Jane referenced my work in suicide prevention, and probably the social connections is probably the most important protective factor that we have in our suicide prevention efforts. So not being able to gather in the way that we would like to, and not being able to sort of meet our friends at work or after work, or get together with our families. And I heard so many stories this weekend about Mother's Day and people not sort of being able to get close to their mom, and the moms not being able to hug their kids and their grandkids, and just really sort of adds to the pain. And then just all the associations that we have for something that I generally would just call anniversaries. So the high school kids, college kids that aren't going to be able to have the graduation that they were so looking forward to, or even finishing the end of the year with all of those events, and the kids that didn't get to go to their proms. All of those kind of anniversaries are really huge losses for us at this particular time. And then not to mention just the loss of privacy. I mean, how many of you have quite a number of people in your house right now, and just sort of trying to find a time to get together, and then also find a time to just have some time alone. It's really incredibly hard to do. I was talking to a colleague the other night. She called me to get a consultation around a difficult case, and her kids were all over the house. So she went into the bathroom and called me from the bathroom. And the next thing you know, her 7-year-old is in the bathroom, and she's in the bathtub, in the dry bathtub, sitting there. So that loss of privacy can just feel incredibly huge. And then just the loss of any future dreams that we have, just thinking about our plans for the future, and all the uncertainty that surrounds that at this point. What's going to happen? What are we going to be able to do? When are we going to be able to travel? When are the schools going to be able to be open again? And when are we going to be able to have birthday parties again? And all of those kind of events. And will Thanksgiving look the same, and Christmas? All of those kinds of dreams that we are so important and looking forward to really have been interrupted for us. I don't know why my screen is frozen here. Oh, there we go. And all of these things really are sort of, and people use that term, feeling stressed all the time. And I just want to say a little bit about stress. And generally, stress is something that we find helpful to us. It can get us out of some difficult situations. It can really heighten awareness for us. In difficult times, it really can make us work faster and better. But we have a bell curve when we're talking about stress, the effectiveness of stress. And if we don't have enough stress in our life, then we don't function very well. But when we have too much, then that can be absolutely overwhelming. And you can see, I hope you can sort of see some of those words that are on the downside of this bell curve for stress, because that's really what people have been living with for these past several months, just feeling overloaded and having difficulty concentrating and being irritable and anxious and confused and fatigued. I mean, that's a word that I continue to hear over and over again. I suspect that most of you understand that as well. We generally, but we want to get to the point where we can sort of manage our stress, and I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But I mentioned this word fatigue, and it comes in so many shapes and forms. And it's certainly physical fatigue. I mean, people are describing having trouble sleeping and just feeling like they have the blahs all the time. Mental fatigue, I'm just not thinking clearly as I used to. Compassion fatigue. I mean, I think, are you, when you're watching TV and you see the food lines, I mean, I suspect that you probably have maybe even less of a reaction than you did 6 or 7 weeks ago. So that fatigue is sort of setting in so many different ways. And I was talking with a colleague today about sort of gratitude fatigue, that you know, people are always encouraged to say what they're grateful for, and people have sort of talked about, oh, I'm so grateful for that I have a house, and that I have a job, and that I have my health. But sometimes that just doesn't feel like quite enough, and it's really sort of okay to acknowledge that at this point it may just not feel like enough, and you may be fatigued thinking about all these different forms of fatigue. I mentioned stress, and we talk about 3 different kinds of stress. That positive stress when you're going to a graduation, or you're going to a wedding, or you're at a baseball game and your heart's racing because your team is scoring. All of those kind of things are so helpful. And the tolerable stress is really what most of us are enduring right now, and that's pretty significant for sure, and it's pretty steady. I think that's the major thing. It's just so steady. And the toxic stress, you may have heard that term, but I suspect that most of you, that's not going to be an issue for you, because what we find is that good support, good relationships negate toxic stress. So you can be in an incredibly stressful environment or an incredibly stressful period in your life, but if you have any kind of support from family, and this is really sort of where parents come in, protecting your child and taking good care of your children, then it's not likely to develop into toxic stress. And just saying a little bit more about stress, I'm going to sort of get to the point where how we sort of talk about stress impacts the functioning of your brain and the implications for learning for your kids. But one of the things that happens when we're under stress is we basically generate cortisol in our body. That's the key stress response that we have. And when we're in this situation that we're in right now, people are generating cortisol, constantly, 24/7, and that's generally not good for us. And what happens when we're sort of talking about learning is that cortisol causes our brain to be cloudy. But here's the problem: when your thinking is cloudy, you don't know your thinking is cloudy. So it's sometimes something that we really forget to manage, and we'll talk about strategies for doing that in a couple of minutes. But parts of our brain shut down when we're in that overwhelmingly stressful period, which I think is part of the reason why so many of your kids are struggling right now with learning. And I know you've seen so many different suggestions on TV and in the newspaper and on websites about how to take care of yourself and how to support your child. But I do think some of them bear witness. And I'm going to talk about this whole issue of moving a lot. It really is incredibly important that you keep your kids moving. I mean, that is something that's important, and keep yourselves moving as well. That's so important for both regulating mind and body. Manage screen time, probably that's advice that you've heard, and probably for some of you after 8 or 9 weeks, you probably have thrown in the towel on that, and that's okay too. So don't worry about that. But offer your kids choices still when you can, and that's offering choices is such an important thing for kids to be able to experience, because it really does give them some sense of control. And so we really, as much as you can sort of see on this slide, that a lot of these hints really go to this idea of sort of maintaining safety, predictability, and control in our life. That's a mantra that we use a lot. So we want to make sure that people are safe. We're doing that by staying inside, by social distancing, and the predictability comes in providing structure and routines as much as we can. You know, I think when you can find a corner of a room that you can set up a desk and work there and take breaks and start at the same time every day, all of those kinds of things can be incredibly helpful to people. And then just offering choices gives your kids a little bit of sense of control. So, you know, do you want to do your homework before dinner or after dinner? Do you want to watch a movie tonight and have a conversation with one of your friends on Zoom tonight, and do the other thing tomorrow night? So thinking about any kind of choices that you can provide are really helpful. And then you heard me sort of talk about the importance of social connections. That really is something that we want to pay close attention to. Any way that we can do that, I think is going to be incredibly important. And then for your kids, no matter how young they are, make sure that they realize that by staying inside, by social distancing, that they're contributing to the solution. They have an important role in this. Kids at a very early age understand the basic concept of altruism, and that's also an incredibly important thing for kids to sort of learn and understand, and make sure that they understand their role in the community and in the world. And so those were some ideas about how you can maybe support your kids, but just a reminder about some of the things that we really encourage you to do to sort of take care of yourselves. And that first one is, again, to just be kind to yourself. Just notice your reactions. You are going to have meltdowns. Your kids are going to have meltdowns, and that is common. We expect that. I'd be surprised if you haven't experienced that at this point. But the problem is you don't have anybody. You may not have anybody to sort of share that with at this point. So you have to sort of figure this out on your own, and remember to be kind to yourself. It's just incredibly important. And again, we want you to be kind to yourself, but remember that this is neurobiological. Okay, when we can get it from that emotional back part of our brain up to the front of the brain, we can really do some good problem solving here. Remember coping strategies that you've used before that have worked for you, and that's hard because you're like me. A lot of the coping strategies that I used before involved being outside and meeting up with friends and family, and a lot of those coping strategies aren't there for us now. But think about other coping strategies that you have used during difficult times. Music, for example, can be extremely helpful. Teenagers find developing a playlist to help them cope is incredibly powerful for them, and they do that. That's something that they know well and do that. But adults can do that as well. But any kind of coping strategy that you can use, whether you enjoy reading or exercising, anything that you can do to sort of maintain some of your coping strategies is going to be helpful to you at this point. And then it's so important to just set small, achievable goals for yourself. If you can really sort of fatigue yourself if you are thinking, when is this going to be over? Is this going to be months more? And what's going to happen in the fall? And what's going to happen next year? Am I going to be able to sort of take that trip next year? You can really sort of worry about things that at this point you have no control over. So the idea here is, yes, you want to have sort of long-term goals, but you really sort of want to spend most of your time focusing on setting small, achievable goals. So I think one of the best things that you can do is the night before is plan what you're going to do for the following morning, and maybe even what you're going to do before breakfast. How you're going to get yourself through lunch. How are you going to get, and then once lunch rolls around, then how are you going to get yourself to dinner time? But just breaking down those goals into small, achievable ones I think you're going to find keys. So we're really sort of thinking here, yards, not miles, and minutes, not days. And then don't forget, you have very likely been doing some great parenting throughout these last several years, and just remind yourself that you are a good parent, you have good skills, you've gotten your children to where they are now, and this is going to be sort of a rough patch, no question, but you're going to be able to get through it with your parenting skills, and I think we'll probably all come out of this and we'll be okay. And make sure that you do find some time for yourself, even if it's just small chunks of time, 10 minutes, 15 minutes. Just find some way to sort of get off by yourself. Maybe take a walk around the block. Maybe carve out some time after the kids go to bed when you just can sort of spend some time focusing on yourself. And then also make sure that you are maintaining your social connections as well. Who are the people in your life that get you? Those are the people that you want to reach out to. The people who are good listeners. They don't, a lot of us have loved ones in our life that really care a lot about us, but when we get off the phone with them, we just feel sort of more anxious because they are so worried about us that we end up soothing their worries and don't get any support for ourselves. So think about those people who get you, that are good listeners, and reach out to them and spend some time talking with them. And then I think this is so applicable to the issue of the kids learning here. This is a dilemma that you can't think yourself out of. You have to, if you're going to have good self-regulatory skills, you really have to start learning from the bottom of the brain and working your way up. So probably the first thing that you want to do is just help your kids regulate. So that's the music, that's walking, that's stretching, that's breathing, anything that you can do. And a lot of times people start the day or end the day with a good period of exercise or a good long walk or something like that, or spending 30 minutes out in the field playing catch or something, and that's okay. But also we have to do that more often than we think. We have to do what Bruce Perry refers to as dosing throughout the day. So ideally, for every 30 minutes that you're sitting, you want to move for 5. Anything that's sort of pattern, repetitive, so it could be jumping jacks, it could be stretches, yogas, poses, anything that we sort of refer to as kind of a postural reset as something that you can do. That's what you need to do first. Then you have then you relate. That's the second part of this. You have good two-way communication, a nice conversation about what the day is going to be, what the work's going to be that you're heading into. And then you can reason. Then you can sit down and learn. And I would say, as I'm sort of wrapping up here and getting ready to sort of open it up for questions, if you can only do 3 things, really pay attention to your sleep. Sleep is the best barometer for how we're doing. And so as much as you can, and I know you can't do this all the time, but as much as you can, trying to go to bed at the same time every night and trying to get up at the same time every day, and making sure that you get a good, The ideal is making sure that you get 8 hours sleep. Again, I know that sometimes it's very hard to do, but that should be your goal. And it's not 6 hours, it's not 7 hours. Between the seventh and eighth hour is when a lot of the consolidation of memory takes place. So even more important for kids to get lots of sleep. And then movement, I've been talking about that a lot. I think that's so important. And then the third thing, for a lot of us, we're watching too much news. I've certainly been guilty of this myself. And try to limit your getting your news from the TV. Make sure that you certainly want to stay current. You want to find out what's happening around the state and around the country and around the world. But you do better when you can get that information from print, from the news or from a website. The TV news is certainly, it just taps into a whole different part of your brain. And if you want to watch the news, I would say maybe watch for a half an hour in the morning and then watch it for a half an hour in the early evening. Try to stay away from watching the news just before you go to bed or right when you get up in the morning. So I think this is a good place to sort of stop and kind of open it up for questions. And maybe Jane and Amy want to sort of throw in some suggestions as well.
Thank you, Jim. Before we move on to questions or more information for you to share with us, I do want to introduce 3 staff members who joined us this evening. Amy Madden is the school adjustment counselor at Center School. Amy, maybe if you give a wave. Sarah Kessler is the school psychologist and adjustment counselor at the Cedar Elementary School. And Carrie Gonzalez is the school psychologist for our elementary schools. And they're here joining us this evening and happy to answer questions as well, along with Jim. We did have a couple of questions come in while you were talking. The first one is from a parent who's asking about working working with students or working in an area where there was already trauma or traumatic environment, and how do you support students who already were living with trauma prior to the pandemic?
I think that's a great question, and it's something that we worry about a lot, because I think for a lot of people having having a history of trauma has made this so much more difficult for them. And people who sort of feel like they're kids who feel like their neighborhood isn't safe, or they're experiencing food shortages and being threatened with eviction. All of those kinds of things really exacerbate the overwhelming stress that I was sort of talking about before. So it's even, I think for those kids, I think getting that additional support, that outside support, I can't say enough how much the research supports that even having one strong person in your life, adult in your life that cares about you and takes good care of you, how important that is in getting through an overwhelmingly stressful period. So, I would say for parents, being able to sort of support their kids, having conversations about how we can stay safe and the things that they can do. And again, sort of going back to that issue of sort of altruism, or sometimes what we sort of call pro-sociality, doing things for other people, that we know that when we do things for other people, that we are their primary beneficiary. So anything that we can do to support others, even on a very, very small scale, can be incredibly helpful.
Great. You guys, do you want to take the next question, or would you like me to? So the next question, Jim, is from a parent who works on the front line, and they are exposed to COVID-19 quite frequently. And I think the concern is they do all the things when they're home. They don't eat with the family. They wear a mask. So they're practicing a lot of those social distancing things or things that we've been told to keep things safe. But I think the question is how to let the kids know that they're limiting their close contact to protect them, and not because they no longer want to be near them. And the kids' ages are 4 and 7, so they're pretty little.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think even, and maybe sort of Carrie and Sarah and Amy can jump in on this because of your experience with younger kids. But I do think younger kids understand that, and it's an ongoing conversation. I think you just have to continue to have that conversation, frequently. Repetition is one of the most effective therapeutic tools that we have, and so letting them know that, and letting them know that daddy or mommy still loves you, and we have to do this, and it's not going to be forever. I think is an important message that you just have to repeat over and over and over again. But yeah, some of you that work with younger kids, you may have a better sense of how to answer this question.
No, that's exactly what I would say as well. It's just they are old enough to understand that you love them, and that this isn't going to last forever. And I think that those would be the exact words that I would use. I would just try and be as honest with them as possible in a way that still makes them feel safe and secure. So I just think the way you said that I'm just trying to protect you. It's not that I don't want to be near you. I want to be with you. Those are great words to use.
Yeah.
I think also an importance of maintaining some activities that maybe you did before, or something that is along the lines of building movement so building in times where you're still having fun together, but still maintaining that distance. So you're focusing on the moment and being able to still have those happy moments together.
And also just, I just want to say thank you for what you're doing. But also, this is so hard on you. And so making sure that you're getting the support that you need from friends and family, I think is key too. And just, and acknowledging that. And I think when you're in this kind of work, you have to make sure that you're walking the walk on self-care, because we tell our kids all the time to take care of themselves, and then if we don't, they see right through us. So you really have to sort of lead by example on that, of sort of taking good care of yourself. It's really key.
Jim, we have another question from a parent who's asking about getting the kids outside for exercise. The kids are reluctant. They did lose a family member during the virus, so they're trying to pick their battles, but the kids don't want to seem to leave the house anymore. Any suggestions?
Yeah, I think you take your time very slowly, but just, this is baby steps, right? You just maybe even sort of standing having a conversation on the front porch, or on the back porch, or just sort of going outside for just a bit and kind of walking a few steps and maybe coming back in, just gradually giving additional time outside. And maybe, maybe you're standing outside and you do something that's kind of fun. You tell jokes, or you tell a story, and make that outside experience a really positive one and a distracting one. Distraction is a great coping strategy for all of us, by the way. So and it works well with kids, but just without pushing them. I think just sort of gradually trying to sort of nudge them and to get outside a little bit more every day.
I think that's a great opportunity too, Jim, for what you mentioned about control and giving the kids some options and some control in when it happens, or what it looks like when it does happen. Giving them that opportunity and empowering them to make that decision. What are we going to do when we get outside? What time are we going to go? Who's going to go outside? Just another opportunity to empower those kids with some control in a situation that feels very out of control.
Yeah, that's great.
Another concrete strategy you could try is once you get them outside and they're doing an activity that they like, you can have them rate how they're feeling about it when they get back in the house. So, you know, before you guys go outside, you could talk about where everybody is feeling on a scale of 1 to 10. Do something outside that's really fun that everybody really likes to do, biking or jumping on a trampoline, and then rate it again when you get in on a scale of 1 to 10 so the kids can see if there's been a change in their feelings and their mood. And the idea is that over time, they would be able to recognize like, oh, this actually makes me feel better. I like doing this.
And
Jim,
I
you
think
have-
also I would just add too that that also, you know, giving the kids an opportunity, and probably you're doing this, but giving the kids an opportunity to sort of be able to grieve for the person in their life that they lost, I think is really important. There's some just great websites out there for sort of how to support kids who are grieving.
So we have another question from a family who has lost someone during the COVID virus, and they're asking what's a good way for their child to share that information with classmates, or what's an appropriate way they want to, but they don't want to scare their friends, but they want to tell them that they've had this experience.
Great question. It probably would depend somewhat on the age and how close they are to these friends. But I'll tell you, as a general rule, you don't have to talk with people about how someone died, just that they died. That's what's important. And the mantra that we use all the time at the trauma center is just remembering how our loved one lived and not how they died. So just letting them know that they've experienced a loss and that they're really sad about that. Sharing memories of their loved one. I think that really is the key. I think there's probably very little reason that they would ever have to bring up sort of the reason behind their loved one's death.
Great. Amy, Sarah, or Carrie, would you like to add anything at this point? We've gone through all the questions in the chat. So I don't know if you have anything you want to add, or questions that have come up to you from parents over the last several weeks.
Sure. I guess, Jim, if maybe you'd be willing to address, we've heard quite a bit of sleep issues with our students, either difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, not wanting to stay in their own bedrooms. So that has been a common thread, especially this last month or so. Is that something, would you be willing to address and talk to the parents about that?
Yeah, well, certainly sleep is a huge issue, and especially those of you with younger kids, if you have not seen regressive behavior, I'm going to be very surprised, because I think that's so common, and sleep is one of the first things that we see happening. And again, I think you can just sort of have that conversation about, well, tonight it's okay, but gradually when things start to get better, we want you to be able to sort of get back and sleep in your own bed, and just have that conversation. And again, that's where you can give them maybe some control, give them some choices about things, but I think it's a goal to work towards. But again, I think make sure that you're not hard on yourself if you feel like you're currently losing that battle and don't have the energy for that battle right now.
Jim, another question popped in, and I think we have time. Hold on, I can't read and talk at the same time. I think maybe this is more of a question for the school. How do we support students when they do lose a loved one, whether it's during this time when we're out of school or at a time when we're in school? So how do we go about supporting students? And I think any one of our counselors could speak to that.
I think that's going to look different for different kids and at different ages. Oftentimes at my age group, which is pre-K K1, it's something that we loop the teacher in on, and the teacher is, just kind of monitoring the student and following their lead and looking to see how they present in the school day and if they need any additional supports. Sometimes, in looping back to what the other question was earlier about sharing with students, sometimes we do give students the opportunity to talk to their classmates in some way, or to share, at circle, that something happened that they're feeling really sad about, and to just be able to get, the support from their peers. So that's something that we might do. But I would definitely say, if you're in the position where you lose a loved one, letting your teacher know and reaching out to, the principal, the guidance counselor, the psychologist, so that we can formulate a specific plan for your child and what their needs would typically be what it would look like for us.
I think that's so key, Sarah, that it is a very individualized process, that we take the lead from the family and from the student. And we know that all people grieve very differently, and that includes children. So each child needs something different. But we need to know, obviously, like Sarah said, us knowing can help us support the child in whatever way, shape, or form that takes.
I think in this virtual world that we're living in, I know even sometimes students would like to share things, or they would like to stay connected with their peers, but they may be a little uncomfortable with Zoom. And I think Amy and the other counselors have put out some great tips about how to manage that piece. And so I would say too, if people are having losing family members or have a need to share that, maybe having a moment with just their teacher, that can still happen virtually or by phone or through a Zoom. And that may be a nice way for them to be able to share that information if they're not comfortable kind of sharing it in that class Zoom session. Okay, any other questions or thoughts that panelists that you'd like to share before we end our evening with Jim? Okay. Thank you to Amy and Sarah and Carrie. Thank you so much for joining us and for all the support that you provide to our students in school and virtually. It's so wonderful to have you here and to have your support for the community and the families and the students at Center and Cedar School. So thank you so much. And Jim, it was wonderful having you. Your PowerPoint had many more slides. I think you could have talked to us for quite a while. So I don't know, I know we recorded this session for those who missed it. We're going to see you again tomorrow evening with a little bit more focus on our adolescent students. And if you want to share the PowerPoint, we can talk about that after, and we're happy to post that as well. But we're really pleased and appreciate very much that you joined us in Hanover and gave your time to us. So thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for welcoming me into your community. I appreciate it.
Sure.
My pleasure.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Good night, everyone. Be safe.